Right. Well, it says that you are Kaylee Wildermuth, but we all know that you are Bobby Stroupe. So, Bobby, man, thanks for taking the time to do this Q&A with some of the Proteus Nation.
No, I'm excited to be here. It's great to talk to you, Will.
Yeah, man, it's good to catch up. I know it's been a while. I moved overseas. You've been doing big things, appearing on Netflix. So there's been a lot going on with you. Tell us what's going on with you right now. Actually, kind of what's going on in the Bobby Stroupe world before we get into the questions.
Yeah, so it's that time of the year, right? It's in season. So right now it's just trying to make sure that all the people that I'm working with are not just maintaining but getting better during the season. So there's a lot of football to be watched, a lot of things to take into consideration, and then we've got our scripts. But as you know, that there's a lot of on the fly changes depending on what happens, every week on Sunday. So it's a fun time of the year. It's a really exciting time of the year, and it's just kind of all eyes on Sunday.
Dang right, man. I love football season. Although now that I live in London, it has a different meaning here, right? So I'm doing my best to keep up with both sides. So thanks everyone for joining. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things at the top. If you have any questions for Bobby, you can ask in the comment box. So just drop a comment and I'll ask them. We already had some people submit a bunch of questions. So I'm going to start by hitting those up first, and then we'll take those questions from the comment box and kind of near the end. And then we might actually near the end also, if time permits, take some live questions from folks too. And to do that, you'll just kind of do the hand raise on Zoom, and then we'll open you up and ask your question. So that's just the housekeeping done. So as I am the part of the host here, I get to ask my question first. So Bobby, when I first met you, it was at the Power Conference, right? And I immediately recognized something. There's some things that you talked about that really resonated with me, something I tried to strive for as a practitioner, both as a strength coach and as a PT, which was, to me, the definition of athleticism is someone that possesses kind of the most number of movement options to achieve a desired outcome or task, right? They can select as many different ways to perform their task, right? They have a large library or kind of movement selection to select from, which I believe you call movement literacy, right? I think that might be the term you like to use. Tell me if I'm wrong there, but I really recognize that in your talk, and you had this awesome system for kind of developing that in athletes, really improving their movement literacy. So I really want to kind of start by saying, did I describe that well? Your kind of philosophy, so to speak, and then how does Proteus fit into that for you with your clients?
Yeah, so movement, you explained it perfectly. I think movement literacy should be a top priority for really every athlete that is competing. And that can be defined in a lot of different ways, but variability is a summation of that. And I think that the more ways that an athlete can solve a problem, there's a more likely chance of them being able to do those things on the field of play. And so, that's different for every sport. But the book, there's a book called Range that goes into why human beings could beat certain types of AI in certain scenarios, and it's due to different types of problem solving from a diversity of different backgrounds and movements. And so when you talk about exposing athletes to that variety, we can't just do cute stuff, as our entire training toolbox, or our guys will get, or our athletes will get destroyed out there. There is a certain amount of resiliency, force absorption and force transmission and things you have to build through strength training and a lot of principles of strength conditioning that have been around forever. But when you talk about what is the lifeblood and what is the spirit of athleticism, that's that proprioceptive ability, those problem solving abilities that have to do with things that are deep in your subconscious and have to do with more than just muscular development. And I think that Proteus is one of the better tools to be able to develop that. And in particular, like one example would be, when someone throws, whether it's a javelin or a baseball or a football or even a tennis swing, anything like that, your femur, or sorry, not your femur, your humerus can rotate, almost 9,000 meters per second. As far as the latest research that I've seen. Well, there's nothing you can do from a strength lift or even an Olympic lift to get that type of rotation in the humerus.
Right.
But you look at something like the Proteus, not only can you measure that on a punch, you can cue your athlete to get that rotation and that pronation that we want, where the elbow's up and out from any type of thrower. It doesn't have to be specific. It's specific to the rotation of this humerus. Now you're getting a velocity specific meters per second movement on that. And you can quantify it, and you can quantify the range of motion. And then you can specifically train it. So I'm already ranting and going too far with my first question. So I'll pass it back to you.
No, hey, no, that was perfect. That's why I wanted to ask it. I wanted to kind of set the table by folks getting your philosophy. That was something that I was really drawn to and really loved about your talk at the time. So that was perfect. So, I guess the next question might be, I'll kind of one more from me here, and then I'm going to the Q&A from the audience. How are you using Proteus kind of overall in your daily practice? And, what are things that you're kind of excited about using it? How are you using it now, and how do you plan to use it in the future, I guess?
Well, first off, I think that this is a tool that can be utilized a number of different ways. And the way that I utilize it is not going to be how a lot of people would utilize it in a team setting or a lot of different areas. I have different resources, different tools, different pieces of equipment in different situations from a logistical standpoint than others. So I don't think this is the way at all. But the way that I implement Proteus is on a very consistent basis, especially in the season. We visit it 3 times a week. If it's in the season, if I have my way with an athlete, that's what I prefer. And the reason is because I have a very simple list of movements that I do. And I believe there's 8. And what I do is on the first day of the week, the day after the game, I do 20 repetitions at each of these movements. And I do it at a heavy weight. Now, if you've played with a Proteus, 20 pounds is very heavy. So 20 pounds is kind of my go-to for a very strong athlete, regardless of the position. Regardless of the sport, on the day after the game. And why would I do this is because having high velocity exposures the day after the game is really hard on the central nervous system. However, for me, heavy weight helps take what I call take the wrinkles out of the sheets. So you start to do these movements and you start to see, okay, here's what's been affected by the contact yesterday. Here's what's been affected by the stress of the game or the movements or just general fatigue. And it helps you because you can see as these athletes work through these 20 reps, okay, is this getting better or worse? Maybe they can't even rotate past here. They can't get there. Maybe when they're going overhead, it's limited. We've got a small range of motion today. Or maybe there's some soreness on the ribs, or there's so many ways that you can watch someone on the Proteus and really kind of get a game plan for what your movement strategies are going to be the next day and the coming days. And that's not the only thing that I utilize it for. And that's not the only thing that I do for those reasons, but it's a really good place to start. And for instance, if you had a quarterback, you don't necessarily want him to go through all the throwing motion the day after, but you can do these things and see, oh my gosh, we've got a real problem on the left side of the neck here, or we better get this worked out in tight peroneals, or he's not getting good internal rotation on the left hip. And those 20 reps at a heavy weight give me a good place to start as I move forward. Now, the second session that I do, or that I'd like to do on the Proteus every week, is going to be more in that middle range. What I'm targeting is that 40 to 60% of what be a perceived maximum. But most of the time, I'm going to be honest, I shoot right at 10 pounds. I'll range between 8 and 12 pounds. I do the same movements, but now I've got an expectation on the velocity and the range of motion. I'm looking for a certain meters per second. I'm looking for something that is, the muscular system is not going to be able to help contribute much much higher than a few meters per second. But then you start tapping into the tendon and ligament and fascial systems when you start getting up in that 7, 8, 9 meters per second. And these movements are way faster than a movement they're going to produce in the game. But the adaptations and the effects are going to apply to this free speed and free type of explosive movement that these guys are going to get without tapping into some of these energy systems. So that's why you want to do that on that second day. And I do the same movements. I don't mix it up at all in the season. I want to keep it the same. But what is completely different for the body is the experience and the stress. It's different tissues. It's a different experience for the central nervous system. And hopefully these adaptations are going to contribute to performance in the coming days after that. Now, there's more extended time between day 2 and day 3, but on the day 3, what I'm looking for is the exact same movements, but I'm taking this weight down to a sub 20% load. It could be as low as 3 pounds, but most of the time it's going to be around 5, sometimes down to 2. And now I'm looking for PRs on meters per second. You know, I've had athletes hitting that 8 meters per second on the Proteus before in various movements. And what you're talking about is getting people an exposure. You're talking about teaching the spine to be an accelerator, to be like a nitrous in a car. The car's already moving, but it should be an accelerator. It's not the production of power, but it's an amplifier of power. And so now your exposure is purely on these soft tissues that are muscles cannot help much from the conduction, and it mainly a deceleratory component at this rate. And so you're talking about priming up the central nervous system and the proprioceptors for appropriate ranges of motion, appropriate levels of speed for safety. You're teaching the body what it can and can't do at these high velocities. And this should be much, much faster than a game-like movements. And so you're priming up the body. And what I've heard said many times is if you can, drive a car under control at 250 miles an hour, it's really easy for you to drive at 100. Everybody else that might be going fast. But when you expose someone to 8 different movements, and through the course of the week, you've increased mobility, stability, range of motion, and now velocity. Now, not only are you getting faster towards your competition, and your body's it's more relevant as far as the tissues that you're touching on. Now you're going to be able to carry that into the game from a neurological standpoint. So that's how I implement Proteus during the season. And it doesn't matter the sport. I would do that exact same approach.
I love that. And I know people are going to, and here came the first question asking this. I know people are going to want to know it. Can you tell us what some of those movements are, or is that the secret sauce?
Oh no, I can't. That's the secret. No, I'm just kidding. Of course I can. It's not. Look, the thing about having a piece of equipment, a tool like this, is you want the complexity to be in the technology.
Sure.
You want the complexity to be on, the reasons, but you want the athlete. This is my problem with a lot of things. If the athlete has a technical proficiency component to what they're having to do, you're not going to get an accurate reading, and you're not going to get the most pure effort. That's why granny toss, med ball throws, 10-yard sprints, it's hard to beat those types of things because, how much do they need to know to be able to do that? Same thing with this. If they're doing the same movements 3 times a week, there's not a technical component to the feedback you're getting. They're this or they're not. And I love that some in certain settings and certain times of the off season, like a vertical jump is that way as well. There's a lot of ways to do this, but the way I look at the Proteus is this is simple. And so I'll tell you some of the motions that we do. Straight on punch, but again, when I see this, it makes me want to throw up in my mouth. You got to get rotation. I don't care what you are and what you do. Getting that rotation is vital because that's tapping in to different fascial lines, tendon and ligament structures, attachments. You talk about people that have torn pec issues. You got a lot of bodybuilders in football right now, and everybody's like, I just can't understand why they're hurt all the time. Well, I don't think it's very hard to understand that if you're bodybuilding and then you're out there and you're one of the fastest athletes in the world, most explosive, tearing a pec, a bicep, because you haven't exposed your body to that type of velocity and resistance. And that's a problem. So the punch is one. I do punches on both sides. Typically my reps, and I didn't touch on this, but I will now. My reps will go from 20 on the first day down to that 8 range, 6 to 8. I'll be honest, when their power starts dropping and I can see it, I say, cut, that's it. And then the last day of the week, a lot of times we're going for a double or we're going for a triple. And these are rapid fire. Now, I don't count short strokes on this stuff. It's got to be full range of motion or it doesn't count. I'll start them over. But they only get one set on all this. And I know I'm supposed to be explaining, but I'm ADD, so we're going to talk about something. We're talking about this. So you've got to make sure that you know that the application is for what it is. I give them one set on everything, and the rep ranges are important, and the cues and what they're trying to do is important. It's more of a rhythmic type thing on the first day. The second day is sometimes we'll do singles. Okay. The third day is going to be rapid fire movements, right? Now that the punch is the first one. The second one is overhead. I call these rainbows. Now what I'm looking for, and I tell these guys all the time, I'm looking for these anime, Street Fighter, video game shapes. If you can't see yourself making a big line that would be on a video game or in one of these fighting cartoons, then you are not doing what I'm desiring. I want their hands behind the ears, and I want a big wheel and a big shape. And Proteus is good about being able to measure that. And so you're basically talking about magnitude and amplitude from a vector standpoint and velocity. So I get meters per second and I get the range of motion. That's my second movement. My third movement is just basic rotation. And I like for these guys to be right, and ladies to be right on the chest level, right under the chest. Okay. And what I'm focusing on is between the neck and the belly button, getting good rotation. Now I will divide this up through the course of the week to where the head is still and the feet are still. And I want the knees up and out like they're riding on a fat horse. And I want that type of stability and base on the bottom. And I want that stability here where they're still like an owl. Okay. And I want that rotation. Now, the next day of the week, I will typically add internal rotation. So stay with me. I'll add internal rotation on the side opposite of this. Now, my expectation is that that's 10 to 15% more power from a meters per second standpoint.
And you're talking about internal rotation of the hip?
Internal rotation of the hip, yes. So you could, the old squash the bug on the opposite side if I'm going this way and that way. Now, I want to block on the front because that's going to simulate a lot of things that I like. Now, this is a little position specific, but I think it applies to a lot of people. There's not an athlete out there that couldn't benefit from added internal rotation of the hip bilaterally. That period. There's not one. And then there are certain times of the year where I have them turn ahead the opposite direction if I'm having a deficit or issues there. So now we've covered 3. Okay. The next uppercuts. This is 4. Okay. Uppercuts mean down. So think of it like literally like if you didn't have a hand on it, you're doing an uppercut. Now I'm going speed both directions. Now I want range of motion. And remember, I'd still want that anime Street Fighter line. Like if you're on a video game, I want to see that line. So it's big and it's long. Now, same thing. First day of week, feet planted. Second day of week, big pivot on the back foot, getting long, almost like a golf shot, but it's not. It's different because it's straight on. It's truly an uppercut. And then that front arm is going to be for acceleration and deceleration as well. You got that on both sides. So if we're doing a 20, then obviously I'm going to split that up into 10, 10. That's a lot of reps. It's a lot of reps. Okay. So that's 4. All right. After that, I love to go to single arm snatch. Okay. So it's an angular standpoint. So now we've done that uppercut in this direction, and then I'm going to come across and you're in a closed stance. It's a single arm. Now we're going up and through single arm snatch at an angle. Obviously you're getting a lot of mobility here, but this is one of the most of my athletes that have the flexibility. This is going to be where they get the highest meters per second, this or the sunshines. Okay. So in my opinion, this is a very, very good, option for athletes that need that speed exposure. And that's that angular. So you have that on both sides. All right. And then I love to do just a straight on punch. Now this is going to feel, and you're going to think it's similar to the big rotations, but it's not. You're staying close to the body. There's a counter load. You turn your head, big pivot, and there's a punch. Now what
so it's kind of like the shot put, but you're not letting go of it, obviously.
Exactly. And I tell guys, get long, and the length is going to give you the speed that you want. So what I'm looking for on that is, I mean, you really should get some magnitude and amplitude. It's hard to get meters per second, but sometimes every once in a while, athletes will get up there and hit a PR on that. That's faster than anything else that we do. And so this is a big one. This one's going to feel wild. It's going to feel reckless, but it is max effort. And I really love the way that athletes can finish on this. And I think it's a really big thing to be able to finish with, because it takes a lot of power, and you don't want to do this first, but because it requires a lot of what I would call relative internal rotation. If you're punching this direction, if you plant the left foot, you've got to rotate into that hip, which I think is harder for the body than actively internally rotating the opposite hip. And so there's two things going on. You've got a, almost like a pendulum, you're stopping and then things are swinging past. So it is a completely different experience and adaptation from the standing swings that are facing up, straight on. So those are my favorites. There are a few others that I will rotate in. But that's probably my core go-to every single time we're doing those. And I believe I listed 5 or 6 right there. The other 2.
Yeah. Punch with rotation, overhead sunshines. Trunk rotations with or without IR of the hip. Uppercuts, or what I think of as like PNFs. PNF D1s primarily, it seems like. Snatch, and then looks like straight arm shot put.
Straight arm shot put. So there's 6. Some other ones that I'll do, and I love this for a frontal plane load, is I'll do a load here and then I press, you can't see my hand, but it rotate this way overhead. So I'll do that one, just a single arm load, and I'll do that for speed some. I'll rotate through that. And then sometimes I'll actually do a punch where there's a rotation and step, like a transverse step. Now, there's 8 that I'll rotate through, but those 6 are pretty much my non-negotiables. Because everybody can get into some real body specific, sport specific, position specific movements for those other 2, 3 you want to add in. But those 6 for me, those are non-negotiable. I typically am going to do 8 different movements. But those other 2 that I'm doing are typically going to be something that I might add in as a warm up or a cool down, or something that I didn't like or see, or for that specific individual that I want to play around with.
Well, something you're going to like, and everyone on this call is going to like, that I think you're going to probably use a lot, but I'll go ahead and kind of announce it somewhat officially here, is we're about to add the ability for you to select what range they're moving in and warn you if they go out or outside, in or outside that range. So basically we have velocity based training in freestyle very, very soon. So essentially the way it'll work is we'll have a way for you to select, hey, I want them to move with this speed, anything below this speed, it's not going to warn you. Anything in this range will let you know if you go above or below. And then obviously we'll have you can go as fast as you want. So we'll have that coming out very, very soon. That's what I was doing right before I called you. I was working with our team on kind of what that design will be like and everything. So
that's incredible.
I think that's something that's, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. One more that I just thought of that I really love and started doing more of is alternating punches. So that's different than the swings too. So you're talking about both hands on and then punch. And that's straight on. You keep the big one of the big cues is keeping the head still. And I've got to admit that's been a pretty consistent mainstay as of late as well. Sorry to interrupt. That is huge news for me. That's going to allow me to do some really active, coaching on the fly, because the athletes that I work with are incredibly motivated by objectivity, and they want to look at themselves as the best they've ever been. And so the numbers, the immediate feedback, it gives them that motivation to work at the level that they need to feel that way. And I think that the freestyle mode, as you know, is my favorite.
Yep.
And adding that component to it is going to be even better for me to be able all of us coaches that do this and believe in the art of coaching, we can see, but giving that athlete the opportunity to objectively see it is
and that's the key. Is it's essentially there's tons of other VBT technology out there, so we're really not doing anything revolutionary there. The difference is, adding that to the 3D resistance piece, and then tying that in from the recommendations that we provide in the insights. So essentially what we're going to do is, after someone does a test, we're going to recommend the ranges they should train in for the specific movement categories that we've tested. And then obviously give you a way to do that in freestyle. We're going to start there. And then our next big project will be working on that and the workout modes, et cetera. I do have a few follow-up comments or questions that people have asked in the chat about some of these things. So I think I might hit some of those before we change topics. One was from Kyle Adams. He says, do you ever have throwing athletes experience elbow discomfort at in-range extension with rotational punches? We try to go heavier if this happens. Any thoughts? So any thoughts there?
I have not. my general rule of thumb is if there's pain, then I like to actually go heavier and slower
Yeah.
and
Okay.
focus on the full range of motion, right? And then when in the absence of pain, increase velocity and decrease weight. And so what I would say is if you're getting pain at in range, really work on getting the thumb down, because a lot of times if you're here, there could be something in the wrist. Whenever you're having pain in the elbow at in range, I would really look into the mechanisms and function of the wrist to see if there's issues there. And I'm not trying to pretend that I know. I don't have any idea with this athlete in particular, but from my experience, when I'm getting those issues, because I do some dumbbell circuits just to check things. When I see guys that they can't get all the way around, I know we got to fix that before I go onto the Proteus to try to get any type of velocity movement. And so I hope that athlete continues to get better, but I would definitely check on that.
Yeah, another question they had, and I think this is my assumption was this too, but what's the difference between the straight arm punch versus the, what we call the shot put? I think they're the same thing, right? Just a full on load with a push, or do you do something different at the end?
No, I think it's the same. I mean, sometimes, a lot of times, actually, I'll start on the other side and there's like a counter load, like a little bit of a frontal plane load on the opposite side. So if you, I've even called them street fighters before, because if you know, all you could or whatever. Yeah. So because what he'll do in the video game, right, is he loads and then load in the back. And we used to do a med ball throw like this all the time, touching the load in the back and then launch over the front foot. So we do a little bit of that movement. I won't say it's not big, but I'll do a counter movement here, almost like a basketball move, load and then drive. So yeah, I think it's the same. It's just my personality to play with things like that.
Yeah, no, we actually had a thing early on in Proteus where we had a bunch of people doing Street Fighter stuff, and we put some Haryukens and the whatever they used to call the big uppercut.
The big uppercut.
Yeah, we had that on there too. So
maybe we can name, if we add this in, let's name the ones that I do. Let's name them by the Street Fighter names only, and then you guys can name the other things. I want exclusive rights to Street Fighter.
You got it. The Ryu, the Kin, the Blanca,
It's all that the only way we're naming that stuff on my side.
I love it. Well, that's a good, you mentioned med ball. So this is a good segue into one of the questions submitted, which was, do you ever superset any med ball throws with a Proteus move? If so, what are some of your most used combos? This is from Sam Cunningham.
That's a great question. I have done that, and I typically will order them if I can before or after. And I really like to do that because I think it's a different, you're training in the same vein, but it's a different experience for the body, right? So you're talking about ballistics, which is max effort, being able to let go, versus a lot of what you would call 3D resistance. And there's a lot more inertia. If you take a med ball and you try to do holds where you're throwing these med balls, but you're going explosively like you're going to throw, but you hold, that is very difficult to do. A safer and better way to do would be with the Proteus if people have access to that. Now you go and you let go of medicine balls, it's different. That ballistic action is a different adaptation. I do like it, depending on the time of the year and what we're doing and what day it is, I would do Proteus supersetted with med balls after. It's almost like a French contrast in my mind. If you're doing a heavy squat, heavy deadlift, vertical jump, I think it's the same way. And what I would do is I would go heavier on the Proteus and lighter on the med balls. And it would be great if you could do a gun on the med balls and then get the velocity measurement on the Proteus. Now, inversely, you could do heavy med ball work and a hold or a slam, it doesn't matter, and then light on the Proteus side and see if you could get yourself to a PR on some of the meters per second on the Proteus. So I like both. I think you'd use them inversely. What I wouldn't do is do the same exposure. Like I wouldn't do, I want them at a medium speed here. I want to do medium speed on the Proteus. I wouldn't do that. I feel like, efficiency is so important in our profession now. Either the sport coaches are already aggravated. They need them right now, or they need to get to another practice or church or whatever. And so I think just trying to be efficient and not hit on the same type of adaptation is probably the best way to utilize that.
Love it. Love it. So, I mean, let's maybe ask, I got a couple other questions here. I'm kind of parsing through them, trying to keep them a little bit more on these similar topics. So I'll jump around a little bit, but this is another one that kind of, I think, piggybacks on those last concepts a little bit. This is from Bill Miller. He said, let's say a big, strong athlete has big power, but terrible acceleration, right? So big power numbers, bad acceleration. Would you stress lighter loads or heavier loads in their power? He says, my brain initially tells me lighter loads, but the numbers don't always match up with the intended goals. So what do you think there?
That's a fantastic question. And I think it starts with defining power versus acceleration in this particular application. So magnitude and amplitude, right, is a one way to look at it. There's, velocity based measurements. There's a lot of things at play here. I think that if they've got good strength or power, but their acceleration is poor, I'm going to take this as power, meaning, let's say on a vertical jump, they can jump 40, but they can never get to the ball faster than another guy that can jump 30, right? So they have good acceleration.
I think that's and he's also, I think, seeing the common thing that we've seen where you just have a weight room monster that is slow, you know what I mean? Which is something that we get a lot as well.
Yeah. So I think that regardless of an athlete's strengths, and hopefully we all see ourselves as talent ID professionals, because at the highest level, what we should be doing is educating our sport coaches on the athletic capabilities of the people we work with so that they can use those skills and those unique signature qualities into whatever game plan or plan they have with those athletes. That should be a value add that we do. It should be our job. So you've already done a great job as far as starting with that, identifying that this athlete has power and lacks acceleration. From my experience, every athlete needs exposures to 40 to 60% loads, because that is going to help bridge the gap. Most athletes either have an electrical neurological problem, or they have a horsepower problem. So think hardware, software, right? Athletes are strong in the weight room, not so great on the field. They typically have neurological issues, coordination issues, movement literacy issues, right? Okay. In the middle, those 40 to 60% loads, that power area, it bridges a lot of gaps physiologically and neurologically. And what I mean by that is it literally helps with those attachment zones, and not without getting too far into anatomy and physiology. You don't want those rigid connections between, the tendons and the ligaments and the other structures of the body, the bones, the muscles, and in any of that fascial layering. There can be really rigid areas there that, one, increase risk of injury, but also make things less coordinated and less transferable. And that's because there's not enough exposure to that median type of stress. And so what I would say is they need to work in the middle more, and then they probably need to work more speed. But the problem with the guy that has poor acceleration is they need starting strength as well. So what I would say is just get them all three of those exposures. They need all three of those exposures. And this is the thing. Probably what's happening is this is an athlete that probably lifts heavy very, very frequently and doesn't have that many exposures to that 40 to 60% maximal effort, exposure, and maybe is not giving you their best on that 20% and under. Because the one thing that rises all tides is that 20% and under. When the electrical components of anything elevate, it's like a software update. All this stuff ends up working better. And so that's the one thing. There's a reason why power lifters do throw 4-pound med balls and do things like that, because it elevates those systems to where you can access strength faster, you are stronger.
Right.
That's a fact. So there's a lot of ways to go about that without knowing the athlete. I would just say make sure they're getting equal exposures to those three types of.
I like it. Yeah, and it's
could be more.
Yeah, and it's how the way that we define it obviously is power is a function of a peak velocity that you achieve with the resistance that you're using, obviously, and then acceleration is just how quickly you get to that peak velocity. Right. So what we find is typically, and this is from all the data we looked at, the majority of the athletes we test, most of them need the speed work, right? Need like you said, the lower end of the curve more than they need the higher end, obviously, but really it's often the middle and lower is kind of what you're saying is they need, right? They need that kind of 40 to 60 and then the sub 20% loads. And
I think so. I mean, and it's the same thing on the football field is the guys that can get to 5 to 7 meters per second the fastest make more plays, whether they're guards or quarterbacks. And then, guys that can get to, can run the fastest from 0 to 8 yards, man, they can break games open. I mean, we all know the guys that have good 40 times, but how often are those the guys that are, a lot of these 4.3 guys can't catch a 4.8 guy, when he's got the angle. So we've got to make sure that we understand that is part of our responsibility to nurture those things and not allow, a 40 time to define someone's speed, right? But the Proteus ties into that. Other things, other applications, tools tie into that, not just sprinting and running around. And we can get those tissues ready by doing things like this.
I love it. Well, this is a question someone asked in the chat that I think is pretty relevant. So I'm going to ask this one next is, what are your thoughts about which day you would use in your routine with a football player compared to a baseball player that plays multiple days a week? So I think essentially, asking the question is, you have a football player, they got to get one game a week most of the time. How would you change that if you're working with something like a baseball player midseason?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I've been in this scenario many times. And so what I would say is with the baseball player and an NBA player, I would work off of strength residuals that have been around for a long time. I mean, there's been many of our forefathers of strength conditioning published these strength residuals. So look at your max strength and how long that your body can carry that from an attribute standpoint. Look at your power in how many days. Power, what's typically 8 days plus minus 2. Speed and velocity, 3 to 5 days is what most charts say. Some say 2 to 4. And it depends on the genetic capabilities, training age, everything else, all these other factors, right? So what I do is I will make an A day, B day, C day, D day, E day, F day. That's a 2-week training block for most athletes that are in NBA or MLB. And so whatever your exposures are, I've got it mapped out to where when you have training days, we're going to hit those types of physiological and neurological exposures spread out in the appropriate time frame. So what I mean by that is let's say today you play at 7 o'clock. Well, today may be an A day. So you may be doing some max effort, max strength type of movements on the Proteus or whatever it is that you're training. That may be your focus today. Maybe not on every single thing you do, but it's probably going to be the majority of the content and the exposures that I'm giving you. Now, what can happen is we got to look at the schedule, look at how the body is responding. And NBA is probably the hardest, in my opinion. And then you calculate how those strength residuals are correlating with in-game performance, because you don't want a guy to go out there and be just stiff one night and then loose another night. So you have to feather these things in. And what I mean by that is of all the content that I do, probably 65 to 70% of it is focused on a certain type of initiation, if that makes sense. And the Proteus would be a really easy thing to say, okay, on these days, we're doing these types of focus. And it would be really easy to take that force velocity curve and split it into 6 different concentrated targets for percentage standpoint, or even a weight. You could do that with squat. You can do that with all kinds of things. I wouldn't recommend doing the same exercises all 6 times. You could do that on the Proteus for sure. But with other exercise selections, I would definitely be diverse in the directions, initiations, loads, unilateral, bilateral, all the things. But with Proteus, it's pretty simple. You could do the same exercises with different weights.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great, man. I mean, I really like the idea too of hitting the 6 different speed ranges, right? And kind of making that the focus each day. That's great. So this is another question here that we got that's, I think, kind of staying on this kind of topic. Are you training, and this is from Max Glazer, so are there any specific exercises or muscles you train independently to help provide a more powerful rotation? We obviously know to get better at rotation, you have to rotate fast and powerfully, but can something specific and isolating help that process?
Great question. It's such a good group of professionals. I love this stuff. The problem is that isolation and muscles are so limited on how much they can contribute when you get to a certain level of speed. Muscles are mainly, in my opinion, for stability and deceleration. Okay. That's my opinion. I think that gravity, momentum, acceleration, a lot of these things start with the muscular component and interacting with gravity. And then after that, the tendons and ligaments and fascial system kind of create this speed that the muscles quite honestly can't even contribute to. And a lot of this has to do with rhythm, timing, proprioception, and skill and coordination and movement literacy. So isolation can be tough to target faster movements, but that doesn't mean that if you have a strength deficit that it can't, right? And so I know that's a hard thing to like, I'm sitting on both sides of the way I just explained. Yeah. But what I would say is, if you want to rotate faster, I don't like isolation core exercises as your primary approach to that. I love landmines as far as a contributor for a conductor for strength. Obviously, Proteus provides so many opportunities for you to be able to conduct that, not just from a strength standpoint, but from a power standpoint. But if you're talking about pure strength application, obviously unilateral loads help in the frontal plane. Obviously, multi-directional lunges, dumbbell complexes. I mean, there's a variety of different things you can do. You see it out there. Obviously, if you're strong, it can help. And from a conduction standpoint, from being able to handle that power exposure. And by the way, if your body can't handle it, it won't allow it. So, and if it does allow it, you're going to be hurt, right? So strength is always going to have a place. Your athletes have to be strong. They've got to be. So it's hard to answer that question without knowing specific deficits of an athlete. But I guess to simplify it, no, I don't have a simple, you've got to be this strong before you're going to hit this speed. I want all my athletes to lift, 1.75 to 2 times their body weight in a bilateral lift of choice. Leg press is cheating, so it's got to be way more than that. But that's a start, right? That's a start because it's pretty much a full body strength.
Yeah.
And then being able to do pull-ups, I think, is a pretty general measure. If you can't do 5 pull-ups like straight, no kipping, then you probably have some deficits as far as what your body can handle. And I really love a row for a strength expression as well. Outside of that, and I mean, med balls, Proteus, high velocity swings, ballistics, gymnastic movements on the ground. Those are great ways to teach your body how to conduct that strength, that coordination needed to get to higher velocities and rotational movements.
I love it. Yeah, no, I don't think you were dancing around the question at all, man. I think it all speaks to, you got to have basic, strength, and the foundation has to be there. And then I really like this word you keep using, conduct, right? Like you're really using this word of like, how do you get the athlete to, I guess, express that strength and power in these different ways, right? Is that how you're how you picture it in your mind when you say that, conduct?
Yeah, I think strength can really be misunderstood because strength should be for resiliency. And to be resilient, you have to be able to conduct your own power. Most injuries that I see in my mind have to do with the athletes' bodies are not able to handle what they're producing. And you see this a lot in a game is you'll see a guy that, missed training camp or missed spring training or whatever, and he's got groin tightness. Well, no shit. Sorry. Well, of course he does, because his hip hasn't internally rotated at that many degrees per second, since way before he was hurt. They probably came in out of shape. So if that's the case, how do you prevent that? Well, you have to prevent that by exposing them to those types of movements. So the body starts to make physiological adaptations and neurological adaptations. And that is conducting, being able to conduct, have enough strength to conduct that power. Right. So, slow range of motion, mobility exercises, there's so many things, right? But, velocity specific adaptations, mobility, actual range of motion adaptations, training matters, and adaptations are specific.
Yeah.
And we've got to take those things into account.
I love it. Well, I got a couple of questions here that kind of follow on some of these same topics. You just mentioned having an athlete, come in the, maybe into the season and they're not prepped. So how do you approach training residuals in the off season as you do in season? Like how do you break up residual window training in off season? This is from Chris James in the chat.
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually, I like to program in the off season on 2-week blocks, similar to what I explained with an NBA or baseball athlete, even though those timetables are really up to the training day availability of they can only train every 3 days this week, maybe twice next week, whatever. But if I'm laying out my off-season training, we're going to go 5 days a week, but I'll lay out 10 days as my cycle. Okay. So we're going to train Monday through Friday twice. And so no workout is the same. And then we loop it again. And the way I lay out the strength residuals is I don't believe you need to have a maximal strength exposure above 85% more than every 10 days for any particular lift. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm only going to lift heavy once every 10 days. Don't misunderstand what I said. What I'm saying is we're only going to do a bilateral load above 85% once every 10 days, but I might do a bilateral row in another day. I might do a max effort, max strength pull.
So you'll trade different body regions with that. Yeah, gotcha.
So I would say 4 times a week, we're lifting heavy on at least one thing. Now you take every other type of emphasis, I'm dividing that up as far as what the body needs. So we're going to I'm talking blistering max effort, running speed 2 times a week. And I'm typically going to try to hit a Tuesday and a Friday. Okay. That's me. Now, I also like the application of trying to do it on Monday and Thursday, but it depends on how your athletes come in off the weekend. I like to do plyometric loads in that 40 to 60%, 50 to 70% on Mondays and Thursdays a lot with the lower body. And the reason I like that is because that literally loads the soft tissues in the neurological system for an opportunity to run faster the day after. I know that strength residual is going to lend that. Okay. And so that's what I like. Now, from just a strength training standpoint, which I do at the end of sessions, it gives me the opportunity to have more flexibility on how I train the upper body. Because the last thing I want to do is do a max strength upper body type of exposure and then come over to the track. I really don't like that because I don't want to limit range of motion. I don't want any of these movement signatures to not be authentic to how they actually run, because I want the adaptations to be pure and accurately applied. So from a programming standpoint, I look at directional strength. So vertical pull, vertical push, horizontal pull, horizontal push. Divide these things up unilaterally, bilaterally. And then after that, I divide it up by exposures of strength. So every single movement and initiation and direction is going to have a high velocity exposure in the course of 2 weeks. It's going to have a power exposure in the course of 2 weeks. And it's going to have a maximal strength exposure in the course of 2 weeks. And I know that's a lot, that's a mouthful, but I do lay it out that way. I call it the cake system. And the reason I call it the cake system is because there's different layers, and all these different layers come together to bake the whole cake. You got to look at the big picture and create, all these ingredients, in isolation may taste like shit, but then when you put it all together, this is a good cake. So you got to look at the full 2 weeks and what you're covering in the strength residuals. And that's just how I do it. I don't adopt people will say there's basically like 5 philosophies in strength conditioning. Everybody was mentored by somebody in these different, this is not the Hatcher system. This isn't this is something, I'm gonna be honest, I made this up. All right. I made it up. I didn't test it on females on Thursday nights that are all brunettes that drink orange juice at 4:30. No, I just made this up and it's worked really well for me.
Yeah, no, I like it. Well, like I said, I was very attracted to your, even the lunge matrix variation that you showed at the one conference, just all the ways you're trying to expose the athletes to these different movement combinations now. And then all you've done here to me is you're just now to try to take that complexity of movement literacy and you're just expressing it as many different ways you can across these different movement patterns. I mean, it makes sense, but it sounds complicated.
It's not, it's really not that complicated, but it does require a lot of organization. I mean, you get it out, you write it out, you program it. And
you have lots of people that you're doing it with at once, like multiple athletes. This is a question came in kind of similar to that. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wondered if that might be helpful to people to know how do you do this just with, each client, or are you doing this in groups? Like how do you keep track of some of these things?
Oh, definitely. Like we program, we use exercise.com or like a Train Heroic or all these other things. And I literally lay it out and program it so that myself, the coaches that are working with the athletes, I mean, this is meant to be team implementation, can also be individual, but we're all on the same page. I mean, it could say, it could be a reverse lunge today. It could be barbell reverse lunge. And the goal could be to get to 1.2 meters per second. Well, that's pretty hard. Okay. So that's you're not going to be able to load up at 80% for that. Now I could put a percentage. Right. It depends on the group and what they prefer or what lift we're doing. Same thing for, let's say, trap bar deadlift. We could be going above 80%, trying to hit new PRs today. Well, we're not going to do that more than every 10 days. Every 2 weeks. I can promise you that. Mm-hmm. But on Monday, we could be doing 20%, trying to hit 2.5 meters per second, which is incredibly difficult to attain. Yeah. And we could be doing sets of 2. That's a jump with the trap bar. So those are the same, that's what I'm talking about, is just laying this out and organizing it. It's the same thing that I talked about with the Proteus, but just in the context of strength conditioning and exercise selection and program.
Mm-hmm. Love it. So there's a kind of another kind of tangential question, but do you, following adding Proteus to your athletes' training regimen, have you noted increases in rotational power metrics as measured by Proteus and or improvements in other performance metrics? So this is from Brandon Doan, who submitted this question.
Thanks for that, Brandon. Yeah, I have. So I've seen, so I measure a lot of things, right?
Yeah, sounds like
I've seen an increase in the miles per hour on the med ball throws, which I feel like is a really good litmus test. Now, I can't go tell you like, hey, I've got a radar gun out here and the stalker says that he's throwing 98 and he was throwing 84. I don't have a lot of that data, but I will say from a med ball standpoint, where I have a lot of guys plateauing at, 32 miles an hour on certain throws. Those same guys are getting up to 38 miles an hour on certain throws. And the only thing that's changed is more time and implementation of Proteus. And I feel like that's very relevant because,
awesome.
Yeah, I think the Proteus in the Proteus numbers, yes, they do improve. Now, they improve in 2 ways. They improve in the course of the off season, and if we take a break, they don't improve. When we come back for the end season, it's like, okay, and then we build it back up, and then they improve as both of those approaches progress. I really want to have my best Proteus numbers heading into the Super Bowl or the World Series or the finals. Right. That's really what I want. So,
that's power and velocity, or more specific to, or are you talking about all the metrics?
Really all the metrics. I mean, range of motion and max velocity are the 2 that I'm really consistent on. I don't think there's any reason an athlete shouldn't be peaking at the end of their season. I really don't like to hear that, oh, everybody's hurt or no, I don't agree with that. I mean, unless if you got a significant injury, I dealt with an athlete last year that had a really significant injury heading into the most important time of the season. And it's just not acceptable to not hit your very best metrics on the things that are possible. Everything doesn't have to be down just because one part of your body is. So I think doing what you can responsibly and hitting those numbers and going for max numbers is something you should continue to do, no matter if you have an injury or you have a deficit. That doesn't mean the whole body has to be down. And that's one of the beautiful things about Proteus is you can keep the body speed ready, even if the body can't handle the load of actual speed. If I have someone, touching 8 meters per second on movements with the Proteus, their body's not going to be shocked when I need them to run 21 miles an hour in the game, even if they haven't been able to run full speed of practice.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I really like that approach. So this kind of said a couple of things there, and there are some other questions relating to this. How do you determine the resistance setting when you bring an athlete in, and what are the factors that you make deciding to increase the resistance setting? Does this have to do with, so that was from Denny, who submitted this. You sound like you're using VBT a lot, so is it velocity that you're determining for load increases on different things, or what's your general thought on that question?
I mean, it depends. I think generally starting off, I start them off pretty heavy to see what their capabilities are. And I really don't care about the velocity at all. I'm looking for range of motion and work capacity, kind of like an old school approach, right? It's like you probably do a barbell complex with the barbell before you start, doing some of these other things. And same thing. I mean, if it's an athlete that I know to be strong by their own definition, then I'll start them with 20 pounds and make them work range of motion in my big 6 movements, probably +2 with what I see. I might add a couple different things. And then I kind of get an assessment of, man, they can't even move this when they get past 8 reps, or this is way too heavy for them. Even though they're a 500-pound bench presser, they can't even do this. So you make those, everybody on this call is a great coach. They wouldn't be looking into this information if they weren't. So they're going to be able to know. I start heavy and slow because the reason is because it's safe. Now, if it's an actual strength lift, I'm not going to start heavy and slow. I'm going to start slow and technical and light, but I don't do that with the Proteus. I'll start a little heavier to see, in my definition, mobility is strength through a range of motion. So I suppose what I'm looking for in these movements is mobility, which in my opinion, is strength through a range of motion. So that if they're a 400-pound bench presser, but they can't do 20 pounds past here, and they drop it, well, they've got no mobility in a functional sense, in a movement perspective. And that's probably why they can't win at the point of attack. And that makes Proteus very relevant.
Love it. Well, I have a couple of questions here that are kind of a little bit more, I guess, career focused. And I want to give those a little attention since we are kind of running short on time. What has set you apart from other trainers in attracting professional athletes? This was from let's see here, from Colby, who's actually on this call too. So there he is.
Well, I appreciate that question, Colby. And Colby, I would say nothing. I get this a lot, and this is not a condescending answer. I think this is a very good question because it's something that I'm going to tell you I wondered about for 15 or 20 years myself. And I would say go make authentic relationships and make sure that every athlete you work with is treated like it's your dream athlete, like it's the greatest athlete in the world. And I kind of know what you're getting at, and I get it, is that, like, how do I get to working with people like that? You don't. What you do is you work with people, you create that type of confidence in them that they're special and that they're unique. You push out their signature uniqueness. And you do it enough times, someone's going to make it to where you're dreaming of working. I promise you. And so a high majority of my athletes, I started working with them when they were elementary school kids, a high majority of them. I could tell you that over 120 athletes I started with when they were in elementary school that made it to the professional level in 6 different sports, not because of me at all, but it's something that I had those relationships that entire time. I was able to see their journey, right? And those are the reasons why I got those opportunities. I've never solicited an inbox of an athlete trying to chase them down. I have actively reached out to hurt athletes and asked if I could help. I have done that. And if you have those opportunities and you can pour into someone when they're at a point in their career where they're middle school, high school, whatever, take those opportunities to help people. And you just never know where it's going to go. I mean, a lot of the greatest opportunities I ever had came from helping a B team athlete, and then them or their parents telling another athlete that was dominant how great that the experience was. And so I think you got to, man, like, this is way too philosophical. I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to be saying this, but love where you're at, love who you're with, and love what you're doing. And you got a great opportunity to work with the people that you think you want to work with, but you need to be careful because you might already be working with them. There's some people that that I'm with now that were B team quarterbacks in 8th grade, or how many would you place a bet that, the kid that you're working with, if they're not even playing the position they're a perennial all pro at as a sophomore in high school or a junior in high school, that's a real thing, male and female all over. So, man, be where your shoes are at, right? Like, go in, don't worry about these shortcuts, like affect enough people, and there's going to be good people that get the places you want to go. And God willing, if you have those relationships and things line up, you get to continue to have those relationships and work with those people. But I will say, nobody's going to stay with somebody that's not helping them. It doesn't matter how much they care about them or love them. Doesn't matter. You gotta study, you got to get better. You got to keep adding value. And you got to be good at your job. Nobody keeps people around as an ornament very long, maybe for a little while, but not very long. It's a professional sports is tough. It's short and it's unforgiving. And sometimes people get fired for the wrong reasons. And so, man, I wouldn't count on it. Kids are the lifeblood of our profession. We can make an impact on the way that they see themselves, the way they see the world, the way they affect the world. And that's always been my primary focus. The majority of my time in my entire career, I'd say 98% of the time that I've spent has been with kids. I coached middle school classes and elementary school classes all the way up until, 2-3 years ago due to demand. But stay in that, man, because those kids become adults, and just sheer numbers. You work with enough kids, a percentage of them are going to be professionals, and that's literally the story of my career.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I know we're already a little over time. Kaylee, I know you're in the room. I don't know if, I don't want to run too far into anything else you guys got planned. There she is.
You can do a couple more questions. Alex is almost set up.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, actually I've hit most of the submitted questions. If anyone has any questions in the audience, throw them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. But otherwise we'll wrap here in a minute. By the way, I really enjoyed that story. Just you talking about working with kids and sticking with them, and also the continuing to learn. Like that's got to be and get better at your job. Are there any particular routines or habits you have into your learning process, and people that you read or follow that kind of influence you continuously, or maybe talk a little bit or touch a little bit on kind of how you're trying to stay fresh?
Yeah, I think any professional in the world in anything should try to spend 5% of their after taxes income on improving themselves, and I've been consistent with that. I try to challenge my beliefs. I study a lot of things I don't believe in to see if I think what I think. I get out there and try to read as much as I can. I'm looking constantly for just anything that could be relevant. I think it can never, you can't ever stop. Oh, by the way, I see Scotty on there. Scotty Smith. What's up, Scotty? Scotty, hey, I got to tell you guys, Scotty introduced me to Proteus, and I'm very thankful for that.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he got me going, and he got me connected with the Power Conference, and that led to all this. I'm thankful. It's great to see you on there, Scotty, and your whole team.
So I got another one just dropped in here by Matt Hopkins. Referring to freestyle mode on Proteus, how are you monitoring acceleration or power PRs? Do you create your workouts as an assessment so it can be documented or tracked, or are you doing everything in freestyle? Essentially, I think what the question is.
Yeah, you can do it both. I'll be honest, I'm pretty bad about, I put it in freestyle and I'll write it in my phone because I'm a dinosaur. That's what I do most of the time. Okay. When I got my stuff together, I'll do it just like you said. Okay. But most of the time I'm just writing it down in my phone, and I just relentlessly talk trash to my athletes. Like, that's not even what you did last week. Like, what are we doing? Like, this is like, you did this in November. What are we doing? You got 2 more reps to get the number that you should have gotten. And if they don't get it, they got to live with it until the next week. I make them wear it.
Yeah. And you're making them wait, you got these 2-week training blocks. So they might have to wait another 2 weeks before they get to hit that number again.
Hey, right? What do they say? Kids learn from consequences. Well, I think this it's just like anything else. An athlete has a bad game. You want to get them back out in a game. I
Yeah.
love exposing guys to one set on this thing and making them either make it or not. I think there's physiological, neurological, emotional, psychological benefits to it. And man, when we all make mistakes, we got to wear them for a while. These guys can wear them for a week or 2 weeks, and you're going to get more effort that way.
I love it. Well, hey, I think we're going to make that our last one. So thank you so much for taking the time here, answering all these questions. It's been really fun for me, and already looking forward to the next one.
Hey, I got one thing, Scotty,
Sure.
if you don't mind. It says, how much has your approach changed between high school, college, and pro athletes? This is crazy. I would say not much. My pro athletes should be able to do what the kids' curriculum is physically. And if they can't, we have a problem. And my elementary athletes should be able to have the attention to detail that my professional athletes do. So I think there's a converse relationship as far as expectations. That's the way I look at it is everybody should be able to be like one other aspect of this spectrum. And if they can't, we probably have a hole either in our expectations or our curriculum. And what our vitality of that particular athlete is, because if we got pro athletes that can't crawl, we got a problem. If we got elementary school kids that can't pay attention to detail, we got a problem. So I kind of treat them, I don't speak to them all the same, don't get me wrong. But there's particular expectations that I think are pretty consistent.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to skip that question, Scotty. That was
good.
unintentional on my part.
I just saw it. And it's on the bottom. So
got it. All right. Well, yeah. Any other last second ones? Otherwise, we'll like I said, I appreciate your time, and we look forward to the next time we can chat with you.
Man, I'm so thankful that everybody got on today. This is a lot of fun. I love doing this stuff.
Yeah. Same here. I love this format too, just being able to take questions live. So really appreciate it. All right, Bobby. Good catching up, buddy.
See you guys.
Take care. Thanks a lot.